We're talking to Hank Thompson today. We're doing this interview on the 21st of August in Texas, actually in Carthage, Texas. And Hank is here for induction into the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame, which will occur later this evening. You said something about being in Nashville, but because of the way Nashville was, you didn't see any future for you there because they didn't like drums and all that sort of thing. So did you spend a lot of time there?
Not a lot of time, but...
Were you trying to pursue a career in Nashville?
At that time, I hadn't really solidified what direction I was going to take. I knew I had an idea of what I wanted my music to sound like, and I knew I couldn't sing like Ernest Tubb, and I had to fight that because I was singing all of his songs, and I wanted to do more of the Texas style of music, but yet I didn't want to sound like Bob Wills.
Mm-hmm.
So I hadn't quite got my direction together, and so I went to Nashville for a while. I went up there, and I think it was about 1948. I went up there to do a show called the Smoky Mountain Hayride, originally the show was done. Ernest Tubb did 30 minutes of it, and Eddie Arnold did 30 minutes of it, and it was Brown Brothers had this thing for Purina.
Was it syndicated?
No, it was live,
Okay.
Live radio.
Okay.
Live radio show.
I know the Browns did had some old disc. They did some syndication.
Oh, they did some of that subsequent to that,
Yeah.
yeah. But see, this was like in about '48, and so I was the Brown Brothers were not allowed. They had a falling out with WSM, and so the WSM wouldn't let any opera acts work with the Brown Brothers. Well, that just about precluded everybody that was anybody except somebody like me, and I was not in Nashville, and I had hit records, so. Ernest and then Eddie Arnold pulled off the Opry totally, and when it took his own direction, he and Colonel Tom started doing another show, and Ernest, of course, went back to the Opry, and so I was about the only one of any name that wasn't connected with the Opry that could do this show. So I was hosting it. It was on Saturday noon on Mutual, and so I did that show for a while, and then. It kind of ran its course, and they took it off the air, and then they put me over on WLAC, and I did early morning shows there. And then I went to Ernest, who befriended me at that time. I went down to his record shop, and I just visited with him. Ernest always had the time to talk to me, and he said, "Son, you need to be on the Opry." And so I'd been around the Opry there for a while. And I went over to...
Were you guesting on the Opry?
I was just guesting.
Okay.
So Ernest said, "You need to be a regular member of the Opry." And so he took me up to Jim Denny's office, and so Denny said, "Well, you're right." I said, "You belong here." I'd worked enough around the Opry, and I went ahead and I did the Saturday night. And then I realized, and I was doing that on that Opry, and I looked around, I said, "This isn't the way I want to sound, and this isn't my music. I love this music." I mean, nobody was a bigger fan than I was of Roy Acuff and Bill Monroe and Ernest Tubb and Dale Dave Macon. I was awed with these people, but still, I wanted to do my own thing. And I got thinking, I don't see any musicians here that can play what I want to play. They won't let you bring drums on the stage. They don't like electric instruments. They don't want to use any type of horns, reeds, or brass, nothing like that. You can't do any of that stuff. I said, well, this really limits my perspective of what I want to do in music. And I said, I just don't think the Grand Ole Opry is my bag. And no reflection on the Opry or the people. It was just, I just realized at that time, around in the late 40s, I could not develop the kind of music I wanted to.
Did you have a little country band back in those days in Nashville?
No, I didn't. I just kind of used the guys there as I did things, and but now I'd used different ones when I was still down in Texas. So
did you live in Nashville?
Yeah, I was living there. I say living there. I had an apartment.
Okay.
And I was, I just realized that this Nashville is not my bag. I'm going back to Texas, where I know what I can do. I know what kind of music. I know the musicians that can play what I want to play. So that was about when I left there, and I went on back, and I was there like in '49, and in '49, '50 around Dallas, and then that's when I began to kind of simulate and realize what direction I wanted to take with my music. I wanted to go the Western swing thing, mainly because that's where the jobs were. You had to do dances. Mm-hmm. Well, to do dances, you had to have drums. You had to have you got a rhythm section. People got to dance to it. If you're going to play 4-hour dance job, you need some variety. You can't do it with one fiddle and one guitar. So that began to kind of gel, and Billy Gray came along, and he had the same ideas I did about how to do the thing. I said, we're not going to be another Bob Wills or Leon McAuliffe or we're going to be ourselves, but we still want this Texas Oklahoma flavor. So that was around the 50s, around the late 40s, early 50s was when I began to really formulate the kind of music that I realized I knew I could develop and do it to my satisfaction.
When you left Nashville, where did you go?
I went back to, well, of course, I went back to my hometown, Waco,
Okay.
for a short while. But then I realized that, I'd done everything I could do in Waco. Dallas was Hal Horton he'd been a big help to me there in Dallas. And you had the big stations. You had KRLD, 50,000 watts, WBAP and WFA, 50,000 watts. You had also some good country music stations, KSKY, that was 1,000 watts, but they were low on the dial. They had a good coverage, and they featured a lot of country music. So that was there, and then the jobs were there. You could play places, and people. It came together there.
Did you ally yourself with another radio station in the Southwest? Like Bob Wills went up to Oklahoma City and
First,
to Tulsa,
and then Tulsa later to KVOO.
Yeah. And others were allied with WSM and other stations.
Yes.
Did you hook up with somebody?
Well, I did first with KRLD because there was a 50,000 watt station, but boy, they had me on a real early morning show, and I didn't think that I had the audience on it. And KSKY was playing a lot more country music than KRLD because that was a network station, so they only sandwiched it in when they didn't have network programming. So you didn't get the real good times. So the 1,000 watt KSKY was down like about 660 or something on the dial. So at that low frequency, in particular, in early mornings, boy, it had as good coverage as KRLD did as far as the ground wave was concerned. Well, you could get it all over North Texas and Oklahoma and everything. And people were used to listening to it for country music because they were not a network. They played a lot of country music records. They had a lot of live music on there. So that station was really far better for me. But the big thing that I got into was doing the border stations. Well, that was like being on a network. So I started doing transcriptions for a little bit XCG, but mainly it was XCLO, the one out of El Paso. And it was 150,000 watts and beamed north. And that thing was the same as being on a network because they could pick you up in North Dakota and Utah and Georgia. Mm-hmm. It didn't make a difference. People tune in, and also those border stations. That's what they featured was country music. So it was a powerhouse, and a lot of that stuff was done there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for those stations.
Did you do live music for them, or did you record everything and send it down to them?
I did it by transcriptions. Many of the acts did the things live. Way back there, Carter Family. I remember listening to them. They did live shows on there. Lou Childry. There was some other artists on there that were very popular that were big on records, like Cowboy Slim Reinhardt and Utah Carroll, the Yodeling Cowboy, and what were some others I can't think of right now. W.D. O'Daniel had his Hillbilly Boys band, and they did it live. So they'd go down to Laredo, and then they had a station, had a studio there, and they'd do the thing on the Texas side, but it was piped over, and the transmitter was actually over in Nuevo Laredo.
All right, what did that do for you? Did that make your records more popular? Did it make your price go up? Overall, did it make Hank Thompson more popular?
Oh, by far. It was like being on on a big network.
Your record sales go up?
Oh yes, definitely. So, but being on those stations and then people like the Delmore brothers and Wayne Rainey, Lonnie Gloss, and some of those guys. In fact, Wayne Rainey was the one that kind of got me hooked into that thing, doing it because they were selling everything down there from harmonicas and tonics and balloons and everything you could think of, on those stations.
I was talking harmonicas.
Yeah, the talking harmonicas.
Yeah. When did you build a big Western swing band? Did that come along about?
That started along about I'd say about 1950. That's when I really began to. Before that, I just had a kind of a nucleus. Had a steel guitar player, Lefty Nason, and Had another boy, Pee Wee Reed, he played bass, and then later Billy Walker worked with me for a while. Then I would just kind of augment it with some other musicians, things. We'd go out and play a job, and we'd call up so-and-so, hey, need a fiddle player, need so-and-so, and get the band together. We go, what we're going to do, we're going to play a show, we're going to play a dance, and we just kind of get them together. And so I'd worked a deal with Billy Gray, and they had a band, Bob Manning and some of them, and they was a good Western swing band. And we did a whole tour, about 10, 12 dates, and was very successful. So that's when Billy Gray got with me. He said, why don't you put, you're popular, people know you. I said, put a good band together. I said, man, you can become the biggest thing in this country on the West, and doing this good dance music, this Texas music. And so Billy and I really set about to get the best musicians we could. I said, we're going to do it. Let's do it. Let's get the best we can. And so as that began to develop, then there were not the musicians as you have today. My gosh, you'd go out today and these young boys and everything scare you to death how good they are. I mean, it's just amazing. These guitar pickers and steel men and fiddle players. Well, back then you could count on your hand of these guys that could play. So and they kind of circulated among with my band, Bob Wills, Leon McAuliffe, Merle Lindsay in Oklahoma City, and then maybe out to the West Coast as Spade Cooley, Tex Wiggins, and stuff. But there was just kind of that nucleus, and these same fiddle players and steel men and bass players and drummers and all this stuff kind of, they'd get tired of that deal and they didn't want to live in Tulsa anymore, so they would go to Dallas, or they didn't want to live on the West Coast or whatever. But they'd circulate around. So I managed to maintain the cream of the crop of these I might say these migrant musicians that kind of circulated among these bands at that time.
Did you put horns in this band we're talking about?
Yes, I did. We put. I was not wholeheartedly for that. We found the trumpet player was Dubert Dobson.
Oh yes.
And Dubert could really play that type of music, and he did the muted trumpet. And the muted trumpet was a very popular instrument back then. Gene Autry used that. Al Dexter used that on all those old records of Pistol Packing Mom and everything. Merle Travis used the muted trumpet with Jenny Cushman that played a lot of his records. The muted trumpet thing playing. Jimmy Rogers even had used that on Louis Armstrong, of all people, played on Jimmy Rogers' session one time. That was not alien to country music at all. It was quite a prominent instrument. So I realized that, but I wanted to feature my things. I wanted to feature the twin fiddle sound and the steel guitar. That was the thing I wanted to focus on. Now, if I used another instrument, and then, of course, I used the Merle Travis guitar because I didn't like regular takeoff guitar. And so when Merle came along, we incorporated that into it. Well, that was fine. But that was mainly what I focused on. And so I didn't really use the trumpets that much on my music as much as we did on the instrumentals and on the jobs. And Dubert was a good singer for those old blues things, and he was one of those guys that really a spark plug. You've seen this. You've seen it on a football field, on a baseball field, or something. And one guy walks out there, and all of a sudden, everything begins to happen. Well, that was Dubert. Dubert come on that stage, and he'd go take a course, and the first thing you know, that whole band is just booting. I mean, it just was jumping. And so he really kept that band it was vibrant.
He was like the captain, I guess.
Yeah, he was. Wasn't so much that he was a captain. It was just the fact that his influence was rubbed off on everybody else. It was contagious. His enthusiasm and everything, and he was having so much fun. That first thing, everybody fell right in with that.
I want you to tell me about The Wild Side of Life. Who wrote it? Where did you find the song?
Well, that's really a strange story, and one that I'm glad it happened the way it did, of course. But that song had been out for a good year. It was recorded by Jimmy Heap and the Melody Masters, which was a very good band out of Taylor, Texas, right outside of Austin. And Perk Williams was the guy that was the singer in that band, very good singer. But they were recording for, I forget the label. It was some little small label out of California. Distribution was limited. Plus the fact the quality of their product was terrible. You know, if one of those records was on the jukebox and it sounded like it was made with sandpaper and gravel, and then here comes a RCA or a Capitol or Columbia or something on there, and here's good quality, and all of a sudden this record comes on, it sounds terrible. So even as bad as that recording was, it was still very popular on the jukeboxes. I mean, you could go into any honky-tonk in Texas, and they were playing The Wild Side of Life. And, of course, they played the thing on some of the the radio things where they were playing country music. So I was doing some songs to go out to the West Coast to record, and I went to Pappy Seller's studio, which was the only recording studio there was in Dallas at that time. And I would do some audition things and some songs that we'd written to see what they sounded like, and so we'd have an idea of what we were doing. Well, Dorothy, that I was married to at that time, and she said, "You ought to do this song, The Wild Side of Life." I said, "Oh, that's just that old Thinking the Night of My Blue Eye and the Great Speckled Bird with some new words to it." She says, "Well, but that's not the point. Point is that it's got that honky-tonk angel in the thing, and that is just a catchphrase if there ever was one." And said, "Everybody, they're playing it." And said, "The record's terrible." And said, "This is right down your line. You can do this song, and it'd be great." And so at her insistence, then I got the Jimmy Heap record. I listened to it. It had 2 or 3 extra verses to it. I knew it was too long for the type of records we were doing, so I rewrote those other things and just made it into one verse on that second verse instead of using all those others, and just the first verse and the chorus, and then I wrote the second verse and the chorus, and we had a little fiddle turn around in the middle. So we did the audition disc. Well, this was my first record session with Ken Nelson. I'd been Lee Gillette, and Dee Kilpatrick had done a couple of things with me. So Ken had taken over the A&R for country music at Capitol, and I'd met Ken before out there. He'd been doing transcriptions and stuff. So Ken listened to these songs with me, and we said, "Oh yeah, that's good." Some others, a bunch of things that I'd written, and some things Billy Gray and I'd written, and so we listened. And I said, "Now here's a song." I said, played it for him, "The Wild Side of Life," and so he said, "Well, Hank, that's just that same old." See, he shared my same opinion, and I said, "Well, my wife seems to think that would be a great song, and it is popular. I'll say that. It is. You can't go anywhere that you don't hear The Wild Side of Life." I said, "Maybe we ought to cover it, because they haven't heard any sales. I mean, that little old label has done nothing sales-wise, I'm sure." So he said, "Well, let's make it the B side of the record then." So that's what we did. I'd had the song "Crying in the Deep Blue Sea." That was the A side of the record. Well, it did pretty well when it first came out. Then they started turning it over, and of course, it was playing on the jukeboxes then, and it was a full 3 months before that song really hit the top, and we already had another record scheduled we had to cancel because we had a #1 record. We didn't want to dump another out on top of it.
When your next record was Waiting in the Lobby of Your Heart.
Yes, we already had that scheduled, and we had to hold that up because Wild Side had just started to bud, and then all of a sudden, boy, when it did, it shot right to the top and stayed there forever, it seemed like.
Did her record come out before yours quit?
Yeah, no, it hadn't quit, but it definitely was on the downgrade.
Okay.
And it boosted it right back up.
What was the line Dorothy liked about the Teen Angel?
The
Honky Tonk Angel.
She said the Honky Tonk Angel. So that's
what is the line?
Said, "I didn't know God made honky tonk angels."
Okay.
So she said that honky tonk angel. So that's the thing. And so still right today, people come up and they'll ask us, "Say, sing that honky tonk angel."
They hadn't heard that line before then.
That's right. It had never been used, and what a line,
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize it. I mean, I thought it was good, but I didn't recognize it because I think the melody threw me off of the fact that it had been used so much, and and it hit records, and everybody that's used that that melody not only got smash hits, but all became members of the Country Music Hall of Fame. The Carter family, who did the Blue Eyes, Roy Acuff, who did me with Wild Side of Life, and Kitty with The Answer.
Yeah, you're right.
All in that same melody.
I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes.
Yeah, that was the song that the Carter family did.
And then Roy Acuff's Great Speckled Bird. Where did the melody come from in the beginning?
Somebody's researched that thing. Somebody like Rich Kinsley or somebody like that, or I don't know. But anyhow, somebody that really delves into the history of country music. I was visiting with one time on an interview or something, and said that they traced it back to an old British folk song. Came
Really?
from Upper England, either around Wales or maybe even Scotland.
Did you ever tour with Kitty Wells at this time?
At that time, Kitty was rather well. She was an obscure person. She was just kind of an incidental thing to the Johnny and Jack
Right.
team. So
I just wondered if anybody ever booked the Johnny and Jack show with Kitty Wells on the same bill with you.
well, yes. Subsequent to that, yes. When that and I'd worked with Johnny and Jack. I'd known them when they were over at the Hayride, and I'd worked a few things with them. I was acquainted with them, and Kitty, and I always liked Kitty's singing. I always thought she had a real homey voice that just kind of got you. You just enjoyed, say, hey, sit down and just sing me this song. I'd love to hear you do anything, you know. That kind of thing, that charm she had, and it was so unaffected. She didn't try to do anything she couldn't do or purposely try to be this or that. She just, when she did, that's the way it came out. And I think that sincerity is a thing that permeated her music and went then to permeate the hearts of all of her fans.
Hank, I want to ask you about Hal Horton. I've never known him, but I used to hear Hank Snow talk about him. And apparently he was instrumental in helping Hank Snow.
Yes, he was.
And you have said he was instrumental in helping your career. Who was Hal Horton?
Hal Horton was
it Pappy Hal Horton?
Yeah, they called him Pappy Hal.
Okay.
Yeah, Pappy Hal Horton. Pappy he'd worked quite a bit on the border stations. He was pitch man. You know, he'd get up and do those commercials on all those that PI stuff that they'd sell on those radio stations, and he could, you know, he's one of those guys that he had that sales pitch. I mean, he could make you believe that you needed that bar of soap, whether you wanted to wash with it or not. You know, I mean, I used to advertise Sweetheart soap. I remember he'd say, "Oh, you'll be a sweetheart if you'll use Sweetheart." Oh, you know, that kind of stuff. But he had that real great old pitch man delivery, and was very successful with it. His health got bad, and he had to quit the border station thing. It was pretty hard work, so he came to the KRLD in Dallas. Well, he started doing a show called, and he got the idea of the Hillbilly Hit Parade, and he was on 3 nights a week, like from 10:30 to 11:30, something like that, and he'd do new records on Monday, and then he'd do some of the old favorites and things, mix them up on Wednesday, and then Thursday was the Hillbilly Hit Parade, and that was gauged on strictly by the mail he received, and he would read off the things. Here we got so many, got letters from Montana, we got letters here from Arizona, we got so, and they all want to hear Ernest Tubb, singing this. He'd dance all over the song, and he'd send you the mail. I'd get boxes of it, from things that this mail people would write back in those days. And so his show, and so boy, my records went right to #1. And I took my record of Woe Sailor up to him that I'd made on that Globe label, and got acquainted with him, and he just really took a liking to me, and then that went to #1 on his Hillbilly Hit Parade. And then the other side of it, Swing Wild You Gay Love, that one went to #1. And then I did that Globe record on Lonely Heart Note. That went to #1 on his Hillbilly Hit Parade. And so then Hal was good friends with Gene Autry and almost everybody in the business, because everybody looked up to Hal Horton. And Tex Ritter was a good friend. So Hal was the one that told Tex Ritter, said, look, he was on tour, says, you're going to Waco, says, you got to meet Hank Thompson, says, he's really, this boy needs to be on Capitol Records, and you're the guy that can do it. And so I met Tex, and sure enough, the Tex going to Capitol, and then with Hal Horton, and so they arranged the thing, and Lee Gillette, his engineer, then came from California down to Dallas and recorded me there, and I got with Capitol Records. So Hal Horton was so instrumental in my very early young career, put me on a big radio program of my records, like Hillbilly Hit Parade, instrumental along with Tex Ritter getting me with Capitol Records, and also I took him the original disc I did of Humpty Dumpty Heart, and that was the one that really did it, was that popularity, that thing, and they said, this ought to be a big record you ought to have with old Capitol. So it was Hal Horton and his playing those records of mine that really launched my career.
How long did he do that? We're talking now around the beginning of the 50s.
No, he goes back into he was on during the war years, and
How long did he stay on? When did
he was on until he passed away in the latter part of '48. Because I know that Dorothy and I were married on his program. He had a program called Cornbread Matinee. It came on in the afternoons, and she and I were married on.
You got married on the radio?
On the radio show, you bet. Now, of course, it was at the theater. Hal had started this thing just the KRLD had a dead time after the noon deal from 1 to 1:30 or something like that. That was a dead time, and so he said, "Let me do this show. I'll put you on a show here, and we can sell some merchandise on this thing." So he did the thing. He called it cornbread. They got the idea to serve cornbread in the studio, and that was just kind of an inducement for people to come by, and they had a pan of cornbread. Well, this thing it so outgrew that deal that they had to go out of that studio, and it was at an office hotel, and I think they were complaining about the people. So they moved it to Gene Autry had a theater. It just opened out in Oak Cliff, and they started doing it out there, but it was so far removed from anything. It was just way out in the neighborhood area, and they just weren't drawing the people at that time of the day. So they moved it out to the Arcadia Theater out in Greenville, which was pretty much where all the traffic and things in Dallas was out in that area, and so that thing, people just flocked to that thing every day, and so Hal was doing all kinds of deals. He told Dorothy and I would come up here. He says, "Why don't you kids get married, and I'll get the preacher." And I said, "Boy, we'll get you gifts. We'll do everything." So I'll put this whole thing on and advertise the stages. Of course, naturally, that people were lined up down a block down trying to get in that theater to see this wedding, and Hal staged the whole thing, and it was broadcast on.
Now, was this a live radio show with a live band?
Oh yeah. Dewey Groom was there. And Big Howdy Forrester and Georgia Slim played fiddles, and there were some notable people.
Did you sing on your wedding day?
Oh, I didn't. No, not that particular time. I didn't. So I'll sing at your wedding or dance at your wedding.
When you said to Dorothy, "How'd you like to get married on the radio?" What'd she say?
Well, it all came about with her there, and she thought it was a great idea.
Oh, okay.
Of course, she's the one getting married, so it make a difference when he got married on the radio. And this was, of course, before the advent of TV. This is 1948, and so TV hadn't really made any foothold at that time.
I want to double back to Nashville. Were you there when Hank Williams came?
Oh yes.
I did not know Hank Williams. I knew Fred for about a year. I want you, and I've asked other people to do this, to describe Hank Williams to me. Your impressions.
Most people didn't personally like Hank, and I think most of it was really kind of a jealousy because of his success and the fact that Hank Williams was pretty cocky. He bragged, but it's one of those old things. I think it was Dizzy Dean who said, "If you can do it, it ain't bragging." So I think that's the way Hank felt. I ain't bragging because I do it. And so but he was not one that said he was any better than anybody else. He just blew his own horn, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it didn't bother me. In fact, Hank and I were good friends, and I had no. Things that he would say or do, he never said anything derogatory about me or really to anybody else. He was just always how good he was, but he never said, "I'm better," or he never put himself up by putting somebody else down. He just, say, "Boy, this is a great song I'm doing, and man, when I do it, I can do it," So he just had, I call it confidence, and there's really nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people took that the wrong way and said, "Well, he's but a blowhard and all that kind of stuff." I didn't look at it that way.
I've heard Chet, for instance, who played some with him. He said he had the blackest eyes.
Yeah, he did. It did like he was just looking right through you. His eyes were like black, little black marbles or something. Hank Williams had quite a charm. I think that one of the most overlooked things about Hank Williams was his tremendous stage appeal.
Well, I've heard a lot about that. What was it?
And it's difficult to describe. He just was something about when he went out there. His projection was dynamic. A good, clean, clear, crisp voice. He sang songs with meaning to them, with the simplicity. Everything was very clean, and people could grasp it. They could hear it. They could see it, and there was something about it. And he did it with just such authority, and with kind of an abandon. It was like, I'm doing this, and if you like it, fine. If you don't, I don't care, because I like it. This is kind of the things I would do in working with him. And I always, he and I worked a lot of shows together, and I never did like to close behind him because, we sometimes toss a coin to see who was going to close the show, and I hoped that I lost because once he'd get out there, he'd really get that audience in his hand. Now, I'm talking about Hank Williams when he was straight. And of all the years and the times that I worked with Hank Williams, I never, ever saw him ever touch a drop. He was always sober as a judge every time I ever worked with him. But that just happened to be, but that wasn't to say that he didn't have that problem. He definitely did, and he made no bones about it. I mean, he'd tell you, I went up, I spent a weekend with him one time, and he was separated from Audrey, and we were doing the opera together, the Prince Albert show. And he picked me up at the airport on Friday, and came up there, and he set a bottle of Jack Daniels out on the table and said, "Here," said, have yourself a drink. Said, "I can't touch that stuff." Said, "You know how I am, man. If I take one, I'm gone." Said, "But you just help yourself. Don't worry about me." So he was that kind of a guy that he stayed straight. But when he got off, and he was in pretty bad shape. But I never ever saw him that way.